When we're talking about a system design for an intrusion system, we have to give consideration to wireless points of detection and hardwire points of detection. So let's talk for a moment about the hardwire points of detection. How many hardwire points of detection are required in a system?
It's a very good question, Nick. And when we talk about hardwired points, we want to make sure that we know that they're hardwired directly to the panel or to a zone expander, as opposed to wireless, where it may be just kind of a lick and stick application.
Familiar with that.
Yes. We want to talk about things like door contacts, motion detectors, maybe the customer requires a glass break detector, maybe even seismic detectors. We also have things like build traps for commercial or retail applications. Maybe a panic button or duress button or a pendant is required too as well.
So all those devices we need to take consideration for, do a count of all those disparate devices, and that's going to determine, I guess the quantity of that is the size of the system and the complexity of the system, how many different points there are. But ultimately, when we talk about how many points on a panel, we need to know how many of those devices there are to configure the system correctly.
Absolutely, and that will change the part numbers of the panels and how many points are supported in those different panels too.
So how does that panel get configured also when we're designing the system based on distance of those points? I imagine there's some kind of distance limitation, or how do we address that when we're designing a system?
Absolutely. Sometimes people may put a point in, wire it up, and it may not work correctly, and they can't figure out why. They may have exceeded the distance limitation. It can also factor into what gauge of wire you're using. If you're using a very small gauge of wire, that may not allow for that distance to be ran, whereas you may have to use a thicker gauge to allow for those further distances, let's say 1,000 feet.
So obviously we're advocating to customers to use our resources to perform a site survey with them, but those are things you're looking for, right? The distance of those points, how far they are from the panel, and what gauge or how you're going to extend those points farther from where the panel is located.
Absolutely, and you may need to power those separately too as well because of that distance limitation. So it's important to get us involved as soon as possible so we can take a look at the whole entire system and maybe even think outside the box and take a look at things that customers may not even be aware of.
That's great. Good stuff, and things we have to keep in mind when we're taking care of a system design. And it's a little more, it can be a little more complex than just on first sight. So great information. Thank you.
Absolutely.